There you go. No more mug. I'm doing this in a parking lot in South Phoenix right now. Okay. There you go.
Catching a baseball game down there, Joe?
What was that?
Catching a baseball game down there? Preseason?
No, I'm running state championships. I have 18 games going on right now for basketball and soccer. So I'm managing all the state championships, and I'm headed to Tucson because I had a director call in sick today. So I have to go direct the game in Tucson.
Wow.
Thanks, Joe, for your help. We're going to call the
having fun,
meeting of the Quality of Life Committee to order. It is 5:01, and if we could get a roll call, I believe all the members are here. Jennifer.
Sure. Councillor Jamie Cassett Sanchez.
Here.
Councillor Michael Garcia.
Present.
Councillor Chris Rivera.
Here.
Councilwoman Renee Villarreal.
Present.
And Chair Carol Romero Worth.
I am also here. Next on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. If there aren't changes, I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion by Councilor Rivera to approve the agenda for March 17th and a second by Councilor Cassett Sanchez. If we could have a roll call vote on approval of the agenda.
Councillor Michael Garcia.
Yes.
Councillor Chris Rivera.
Yes.
Councilwoman Renee Villarreal.
Yes.
Councillor Jamie Cassett Sanchez. I'm not hearing your voice. I can see you. I think she's calling in. She texted me technical issues.
It's been a day for technical issues. Maybe you can give us the thumbs up that you approve the agenda. All right.
Perfect. And Chair Romero Worth.
And yes. Okay, so we have the approval of the agenda. Now we need to approve the consent agenda. Are there items that the committee would like to pull from the consent agenda? And if there aren't any items the committee would like to discuss.
Yes, I have some to pull.
Okay, good. Councilor Villarreal, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A for some clarification. B as in boy. C. D. And I'd like to co-sponsor E.
Okay, any other, there's only one item that has not been pulled. Is there anybody else who wants to pull? All right, with
Madam
that,
Chair.
yes, Councilor Rivera.
Sorry, I don't want to pull anything, but I also want to co-sponsor item E.
Okay, Jennifer, you've noted both of those?
Yes, Madam Chair.
All right, terrific. With that, can we get a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended?
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion by Councilor Rivera, a second by Councilor Villarreal to approve the consent agenda as amended. If we could take the roll one more time, please, Jennifer.
Sure. Councilor Chris Rivera.
Yes.
Councilwoman Renee Villarreal.
Yes.
Councilor Jamie Cassett Sanchez.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Councilor Michael Garcia.
Yes.
Chair Carol Romero Worth.
Yes. All right, with that, we will move to approval of the minutes from the March 3rd, 2021 Quality of Life Committee. Are there changes to those minutes? And if there are none, if we could get a motion to approve those minutes, that would be great.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion by Counselor Villarreal, a second by Counselor Garcia to approve the March 3rd Quality of Life Committee minutes. Jennifer, one more time the roll, please.
Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
Counselor Michael Garcia,
Yes.
Counselor Chris Rivera,
Yes.
Councilwoman Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
and Chair Carol Romero Worth.
Yes. Okay, Counselor Villarreal, we will go to the consent agenda items, and you pulled item A, which, Jennifer, do you want to read that caption just so people know what we're talking about?
Sure. Request for the approval of a budget adjustment resolution in the total amount of $569,885 for the budget transfer of Community Service Division youth staff positions and operating budget to the Recreation Division.
Counselor Villarreal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hi, who's there? Let's see. Julie Sanchez is with us and Kira. Just a clarification, because these bars make so much sense. I just wanted to know if I'm correct in saying that the majority of the staff, the specialist positions, are temporary, with the exception of one I couldn't figure out. There's one that's like a 34,000 general salaries amount, and then the others are in lump sums, and I couldn't figure out if those were temporary positions.
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Villarreal, those are not temporary positions. The majority of the funding in this transfer is for temporary positions. The 34,000 represents 8 pay periods for the remaining youth specialists, some of whom are part-time, and that they are all being transferred over to the Recreation Division.
Okay, and then how many were temporary positions?
Those vary. Those are for the summer hires. And so we will be offering the summer program this year. And generally the number of people that we need to hire is around 90 people. We don't have full budget for that this year. This budget was reduced in our current fiscal year, although we are looking for additional funding for that. And it looks hopeful that we will be able to offer our full summer program. But the remainder of that is for whichever temporary positions, youth specialists and supervisors we can hire with that money and have COVID safe practices.
Got it. So typically, did you say 90?
That was in the Youth and Family Services, and unfortunately, Melissa Bustos and Gino are in their link is not working. So Joe, I don't know if you can help them get in, but basically, I think I can handle this question, which is that the Recreation Division has some funding for their summer program, and the Youth and Family Services Division has some funding for their program. So this represents the Youth and Family Services funding blending in with that. I think the Recreation Division in the summertime typically hires about 20 people. Is that right, Julie? And so it all together, the temporary hires can be about 100 to 110 new temporary hires. And typically these are, as young people, young local people, and these are great summer jobs for them. So we're looking to be able to do that again this year. We may get out of the gate a little later than normal, given how we're starting, but we're very hopeful that we'll be able to bring the program back this year, given the way things are going with the pandemic.
So if the funding comes together, not just this change, then you're hoping to be fully staffed with the summer temp positions then?
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Villarreal, yes.
Okay,
We're hopeful about that.
got it. All righty, those are all the questions I have about this one. Thank you.
Are there other questions from the committee on this item? Counselor Rivera.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kira, I don't know if you can answer this or not, but last year in the Recreation Division, I think it was around the holidays, there was some discrepancy in what temporary staff had been, at what rate, hourly rate they had been hired at. Some were making, I think, like $15 an hour, if my memory serves correct, and then there were others that were making $35. And I know that the time frame was very short. I think it was a 2-week period, but this is much longer. So do we know what the average salary is going to be for these 5 positions?
So the average salary for the new youth specialists, they start at 13. They go from 13 to 15, depending on experience.
Okay, so it's nothing like what happened with the, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, my understanding with the high rate on those other positions in rec, and this was not, rec wasn't under community health and safety, as you know, at the time, was that those were actually contract positions. And they were, mentors and coaches and people that would come on contract. And so they weren't getting benefits, which is part of why that dollar amount was higher. Also, they had specialties which required, expertise that could only be, that they weren't necessarily conducive to hiring a person for 8 weeks. That person wouldn't necessarily want a job for 8 weeks. So some of the skill sets we may still need to hire people on contract to provide specialized services and instruction. And there'll be a blend of that. And but those will be that's a contract line item and not a temp salaries line item.
Okay, so for these you said $13 to $15, more or less. Okay,
Correct.
very good. That was all I had, Madam Chair.
All right, other questions from the committee on this item? And if there are no further questions, if we get a motion to, well, what's the wishes of the committee?
Move to approve.
Second.
All right, we have a motion from Councilwoman Villarreal and a second from Councilor Cassett Sanchez to approve this request for a budget adjustment resolution for the youth program. Jennifer, can you take the roll, please?
Sure. Councillor Michael Garcia,
Yes.
Councillor Chris Rivera,
Yes.
Councilwoman Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Councillor Jamie Cassett Sanchez,
Yes. and
Chair Carol Romero Worth.
Yes. All right, now we'll move on to item B. Jennifer, if you could just read that, and Councilor Villarreal, you had a question on this item as well.
Request for approval of sole source purchase of EOD robot from Northrop Grumman Remotech Inc. $305,000 and $1 of funds 100% reimbursable from the 2009 State Homeland Security Grant Program. And that's Kyle Mason presenting on this item.
Councilor Villarreal.
Madam Chair, and thank you, Kyle, for joining us. Funny how you always get stuck with these hard ones. There's a few questions I had that I didn't quite understand the memo. And probably PD would remember that during our budget hearings, we talked about what funding they would like to go, what funding they need in terms of the K-9 program and why that was important. And they talked about how they were thinking of getting a robot and never mentioned an existing robot. So that was new to understand for me, that we actually have an existing robot. And we're talking about it, that it's exceeding its operational lifespan. So that was news that we actually had one that was semi-operational. I guess what I want to understand, it says that this particular robot is required by the FBI guidelines, but it's not required for us to have that. Is that correct, Kyle? We're not required to have a robot.
Chair and Councilor, correct. There is no requirement for us to have it, but to have a certified program. We're a capital city within the state of New Mexico, it is very helpful for us to be able to utilize these tools as a life safety measure for these types of responses. There is no requirement by law. Perhaps Officer Blake Byford with Santa Fe PD can chime in on that as well.
Yes, I'm sorry to, can everyone hear me? Is this working right? Okay, good deal. It actually is a requirement by the FBI that we do have to have an operational robot. We do have a robot right now. We technically have two. What we're requesting is the one is broken. The one that we're requesting the money to purchase is to replace the broken one. This one has much further capabilities than the one that we currently have, which will allow for tremendous, much more safety in our operation on a call outs or missions and that sort. And I'm happy to go into the details of exactly what all it can do as opposed to what the small one that we actually do have is capable of, if you would like.
So that's good to know. You have two. One's not operational, but one is, and you're asking for a second, and it's not required by the FBI, but to stay certified, it needs to function, obviously. Is that correct?
It is required. The FBI requirement is that we must have a robot.
Madam Chair and Counselor, if I could chime in.
Sure.
Officer Byford, can you explain the capabilities of the other robot that is functional right now compared to the one that we're requesting?
Yeah, the one that we do have, its capabilities right now is basically as a scout. It can be sent in and has cameras to look in. The camera can extend approximately waist high. Look in, and it has a claw which can very limited mobility and can reach out and grab small items move them out of the way, that kind of sort. And that's really about the extent of its capabilities.
So sorry about that, just to chime in. So if you want to compare robots, the robot that Officer Byford just mentioned with that limited capabilities, if you can visualize a Bobcat, that's that small little tank-driven little tractor that you see to kind of move gravel in your backyard or do small little demolition work. The robot that we're asking for the replacement funds to use and move forward, that's like comparing that little Bobcat to a full-size tractor. So we're replacing the broken down full-size tractor with a big backhoe in the back and the big front loader to move dirt and dig holes or to dig large holes. That's what we're asking for the replacement of.
But in this case, it's equipment to disable bombs, correct?
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, yes, it's to disable bombs, to X-ray bombs, pick up suspicious backpacks, move packages. It's the workhorse robot.
So I'm just curious, how many bombs or other hazardous devices have we had to disable since 2004, which is when it says we first got a robot?
Officer Byford, were you able to compile the recent stats for at least a year going back? If you need 2004's information, I'd have to dig through my emails because I believe we've provided that information in the past when Kyle Mason was originally asking for the approval of these funds probably over a year ago.
Yes, Chief. Councilor Villarreal, I don't have everything from 2004. I can tell you last year, the bomb squad was utilized a number of, my numbers are 19 times. The robot was utilized 3 different times to assist the SWAT team. And we had 4 separate call-outs for the bomb squad itself.
And that's with the existing robot?
Correct.
And when I say since 2004, I'm not talking about just 2004. I'm talking about the culmination of 2004 to present, of how many times we've used that robot. I think it's important to know that piece of it. When we do these kind of calls related to hazardous devices, don't we involve other jurisdictions, like say state or maybe even FBI?
They're available to assist. Generally, if it's within our jurisdiction, we have a functional bomb squad. It's essentially on us.
But we do have the K9 unit, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And do those work together?
To an extent, in terms of a bomb sniffing dog, all it will do is alert that if it alerts on any suspicious package or item, so forth, and that's the extent of the dog for the EOD purposes. Then we have to get into our mission of trying to mitigate the risk and figure out exactly what this package is.
Okay. So it says that this is a Homeland Security grant program. We talked about this extensively during the budget hearings. And although it says no money is used for the city of Santa Fe, it actually is. And if you look at your background, we spent a considerable amount of money for conducting repairs, rebuilding the robot 4 times, and then any other maintenance. So do we know what the cost is to the department in order to maintain, I guess over a period of time, what it's cost us to maintain that other robot? And then what you all forecast is needing to maintain a new robot?
I don't know what the numbers or the figures were for the maintenance on the old robot. All of that stuff occurred before my time on the team. In terms of fixing a new robot, if we were able to get one, generally the company themselves are very willing to help, and if it's a simple solution, they'll walk us through on the phone and explain to us how to fix the problem. Now, of course, I can't get into particulars on costs if parts are going to need to be replaced and so forth, because there's just so many different parts on the robot itself.
DC Valdez, if you can jump in and give an explanation what we did with the old robot when it was broken and how we worked with our partners to find used parts and put it together, and we did that in-house repairs.
Yes, sir. If I may, Madam Chair.
Yes, Deputy Chief, go ahead.
Thank you, ma'am. Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal. So just put in perspective, the current robot that we have was not a new purchase for the department, the one that seemed to be replaced. That robot was actually in use with the FBI, and they gave it to our department to be able to use. And that's after they utilized it for whatever mission they used it for, whether it be operational or training. So that robot has been maintained by our staff, much like Officer Byford has mentioned. And the current system is no longer available to be upgraded. We can't buy a new chassis for it, so that's a big issue. And that's what's kind of put us in a bad spot. We've had to work with area EOD units to kind of, go to the junkyard, if you will, to say, hey, do you have any spare parts to keep it up and running? And that's been the case for the last about 4 years. 3 years ago, I believe it is, we came to council and we requested funding to fund this project. At that point, it was not approved in the budget. There was talk where, hey, maybe it's possible that PD and fire can share it because PD has a EOD unit and fire has a hazmat unit. Funding didn't come. At that point, it doesn't really fit the bill. They're 2 separate types of equipment. So fire would use equipment in a certain manner, and it wouldn't be the same way that the PD would utilize it. So we went to the drawing board. We requested assistance from the state. The first time we put in, we did not get approved for it. We put in again, and this go around, we did get approved for the grant funding to pay for it. So what this is a big benefit for us is by having the grants in place, yes, we have to pay the upfront cost, but however, the city gets the money back in their coffers to be able to use for other things. Without this robot, we have a couple alternatives. If we don't have it, one, we lose our EOD team and our response capability. Then we become dependent on area agencies to assist us. So if state police is able to assist us, then that can happen. If they're not able to assist, we got to hold the scene until they're able to respond to the scene and mitigate that risk. Now, what does that risk look like? It's going to be depending on the situation that occurs. A lot of the call outs that I've seen during my duration within special operations when I was in that unit, Santa Fe, we have a lot of different things here with the minings over there in Cerrillos, where people would have old unstable TNT sticks in their grandpa's garage, and when he passed, that item was there. So those are things they kind of deal with and mitigate. After the 2013 bombing in Boston, we saw a lot of what appeared to be copycats, where we were seeing pressure cookers that were left in the parking lot. And I remember one over there kind of by the rail yard, by the train station, that we had to shut down until we could mitigate it. It was one of those pots that was stayed there. Now, if we don't have this robot, we're gonna have to hold a scene until we can get someone there that does have it. We're not gonna be sending our personnel up there to examine it, and we don't wanna encourage that at all because that's very, very dangerous. But we've done a lot of effort to try to get this project funded. The current robot that they need is an F6. Our current F6 it's done. There's no way to keep it running. It is no longer operational. So the small Scout robot that they have is all they're utilizing. And at this point, we're kind of at a crossroads to determine, is this a asset that the city's going to maintain, or is it something we're going to let go? And keeping that in mind, there's only 5 EOD units in the state of New Mexico that can respond to these situations. So if we don't have the robot or personnel to maintain that, our entire state's going to be down to 4. As part of this as well, the
Can you tell us
FBI
what EOD stands for again?
Explosive Ordnance Disposal. So with us being off the board, again, we're a capital city, is going to put a major strain on other teams to include state police. And the way the FBI runs the program is, if they need a mutual aid assistance from our team or state police or the Albuquerque Police Department, Doña County, they got to pull from one of those agencies to go and respond. And that's going to put a big burden on those agencies. But it's also going to increase our time that we have to be on scenes. That's going to affect us with staffing as well. We're going to have to hold that scene until that agency gets there. So it's a big benefit for us to have these types of resources. It limits the disruption that occurs to our community. And with these devices, again, we even had a robot many years ago that was sent in to deliver a throw phone, and the person welcomed the robot with gunfire, and they had to repair that. Now, if I'm looking at personnel versus a piece of equipment, I'd much rather have a robot shot with gunfire than one of our staff. So this also helps us out with dealing with situations that involve crisis. It's not just things that are booby traps or hazardous devices. These devices have been very useful in other situations where people are dealing with crisis. We'd much rather them damage property. Property can be replaced, but if I had to send, a pack of cigarettes to someone to go and calm down, I'd rather send it by way of a robot and let them calm down, de-escalate, and talk through that portion. Instead of trying to look at some other alternative means. But plenty of benefits with this equipment. Again, we're at a crossroads. This equipment is necessary to maintain our EOD program. Without this, it's pretty much done.
Chief Padilla, your hand is up. Did you have something you wanted to add to this, or is that old hand?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a new hand. Just what I was able to pull up in my emails here. I don't know if DC Valdez has the stats going back to 2004 readily available, but in 2015, the EOD team was called out and used 7 times. 2016, 10 times. 2017, that's when they were called out 5 times, but at the end of the year, fall time, that's when we had some retirements, terminations within the police department, and that EOD team fell out of compliance because we didn't have enough certified EOD members. Then we got some certified members up and running again. And then in 2018, they were called out 4 times. And then separately from the 4 EOD separate calls, they were used in conjunction with the SWAT team where the EOD robot went into the home 3 times to clear the house. That's all I had, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Councilor Villarreal, you still have the floor.
Thank you. Thanks for that information. So this item, there was well, let me finish the thought about the maintenance stuff and costs. There's still a need to understand what that costs for us. And there was a line item saying that the maintenance training it's a separate quote they require. So is that like a whole nother cost associated with working with this company?
Who can answer that, Deputy Chief? Yeah.
Madam Chair, Councilor Viet, yeah. So when they get the equipment, they're going to get initial training on how to maintain the equipment, and that's included in the cost. And they're going to get a full overview of the equipment because it is going to be an upgraded system in comparison to what they've been utilizing currently until it came to end of life. The cost on a new piece of equipment to maintain it will not be what we were experiencing with the previous equipment, because again, the other equipment was several years old and was experiencing several issues with it. And to my recollection, a lot of the problems were solved via phone calls to the manufacturer and them supplying us with the the know-how to do so, and the costs were minimal. So a couple $100 here and there to buy parts, whether it's conduit or other types of mechanical pieces. But again, they were just trying to keep it up and running with the equipment that was needed.
Okay. There is though, on the invoice that the training and maintenance that's going to be a separate quote. It's not actually included in the overall, this particular request for funding, just so you know. The other thing is there was another memo for this item that was requested initially in August that we never saw. So I'm curious why it's coming to the governing body now.
Madam Chair, Councilor Viadiel, so with this project, we put an initial memo back in March of 2020. We all know what happened in March of 2020. There was a lot of unknowns with the financial situation, so we had to kind of hold fast until we can see what's going on. In August is when we started the momentum again to get this project going. Once things kind of stabilized a little bit, that was following furloughs and everything else that was happening within the city. And we started going through the purchasing process. So because the equipment is a sole source piece of equipment, we had to put out sole source and start the process from there. And then going through to identifying that funding source to be able to bring it forward for purchase so we can have the funding source and have it reimbursed back into the program.
It took from August to now then to get this through procurement?
Yes, Councilor, and Mr. Mason might be able to share the additional information on this.
Chair, Councilor, yes, as you know, the city has a very extensive procurement process, and sometimes if you send an email out, you have to check in on it every now and then to make sure that action is being made. So between the procurement for city procurement, but also getting authorization from the state for the grant, they have to approve the request as well prior to making the expenditure. So with all the moving players and parts, it does take some time.
Okay. And then just I was looking at the information about Northrop Grumman, and the Andros robots are used by the U.S. military, the FBI, U.S. Secret Services. So do you see why it's challenging to try to connect that kind of response compared to a municipal police department?
Madam Chair, Councilor Viadiel, it should also be noted that we use tough books, which are also utilized by the military. The fire department with their ambulances, they're derived from the military when they use carts to cart people off the battlefield. There's many parallels that can be made with that. But again, with us, we understand what our role is in our community. We understand that we're there to make things safe. And that's how we're utilizing that equipment. The equipment is not being requested to be utilized with weaponry, which would be utilized by the military. But again, there may be some of those parallels that could be made by people, but that is not what our department's going to do. You know, we understand we're in law enforcement. We understand we're not in the military, and we're not going to blur those lines.
Okay. I think that's all the questions I have. I would like to know the numbers cumulatively since the beginning of 2004. And then also just what it's cost our department to maintain the previous robots or current robots. And then do we have an idea of forecasting of what it's going to cost for maintenance into the future for a new robot? Thank you.
Other questions from the committee? What's the pleasure of the committee?
Move for approval.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion by Councilor Cassett Sanchez to approve this item, second by Councilor Rivera. Jennifer, can you take the roll, please?
Yes, Councilor Chris Rivera,
Yes.
Councilwoman Renee Villarreal,
I'm going to abstain.
Councilor Jamie Casas Sanchez,
Yes.
Councilor Michael Garcia,
Yes.
and Chair Carol Romero Worth.
Yes. All right, moving on to item 6C. Jennifer, can you read this item too, please?
Yes. Request for the approval of a restated and amended joint powers agreement establishing the Regional Coalition of Los Alamos National Laboratories communities by and among the incorporated county of Los Alamos, the city of Santa Fe County, the city of Espanola, Rio Arriba County, the town of Taos County, and the sovereign governments of the Pueblo of Ocahuingue and the Pueblo of Jemez.
Councilor Villarreal, you pulled this item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have questions, but I think there was some presentation that was going to be given to us. Maybe.
Who is
Yes, Madam
staff
Chair.
for this? Councilor Garcia, was that you?
Yes, we do have a presentation to give this evening. If you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen.
Great, thank you.
So folks, just let me know when you can see my screen.
We can see it.
Okay, so tonight we have Councilor Izraelevitz with us again. He is a councilor from Los Alamos City and County, and he is also a member of the Regional Coalition of Llano Communities. And let me. So I, as a city councilor, I am the member that represents the city on the Regional Coalition of Llano Communities. I was appointed to this role by Mayor Weber when I began my position in January of 2020. The Regional Coalition of Llano Communities has been around since 2011. They work in partnership with the Department of Energy to provide them information as a collective in regards to advocating for transparency and ensuring that the lab is working in the best interest of the communities represented by the Regional Coalition of Llano Communities. The original JPA was entered into agreement with the David Koss administration. So the city of Santa Fe has been a member of the Regional Coalition for at least 8 years that I know of, maybe going back to 2011. With this, I'm going to hand it off to my colleague, Councilor Izraelevitz, and he's going to go over some of what the Regional Coalition of Llano Communities works on.
Councilor?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for Councilor Garcia's invitation. So I think the simplest way to think of the RCLC as organization is to make an analogy to something like the New Mexico Municipal League. Cities and towns have certain interests in common, which they then get together to represent at the state level. The RCLC is similar in that it's an organization of the communities that surround or are affected by Los Alamos National Laboratory. And the two areas that the RCLC concentrates on, which are relevant to all the communities surrounding the laboratory, is economic development based on the employment of the laboratory and procurement by the laboratory, and environmental remediation. So the next slide, please. So in terms of economic development, one of the areas that historically we have talked about is promoting diverse and scientific endeavors at LANL. It's a very large scientific organization. It does a lot of many many different things, sometimes frankly in competition with other national laboratories. So as maybe mentioned later, things like space science, biology, those are areas that that I think it's in everyone's common interest to expand and diversify. Another area is general business development efforts, such as making sure that local businesses have as much of a chance or opportunity for procurement from the laboratory as businesses that are outside of our region, and how to educate our local vendors so that they are at least as competitive, as not have a competitive advantage because of their physical proximity. We can also look at local educational institutions. Those provide a workforce training and development for future employment by the laboratory. The laboratory actually employs more people that live in that were educated in New Mexico as much as from other parts of the country. So it's in the laboratory's interest actually to have a workforce pipeline, if I may, that is based locally. They also find that it's better retention of people that have grown up in this area, that already have personal ties. It's a better investment for the laboratory to employ people like that. And it's also the role of the RCLC to educate about Llano's contribution toward an impact on the region. Next slide, please. The other area of environmental stewardship, we get regular presentations by all sorts of different contractors that do remediation at the laboratory, that do monitoring. So we have presentations from N3B, which is the legacy waste remediation contractor. We've had presentations from NMED about their inspections that they do of runoff, for example, and other things. We've had presentations from DOE Environmental Management, which is the local office of the Department of Energy, which monitors Llano activities. So we hear both from the contractor that is doing the cleanup, as well as from the federal agency that is monitoring the performance of that cleanup. And we also engage with other communities across the nation that have similar priorities. There's, I would say, probably several tens, if not hundreds, of other sites across the country that have Department of Energy facilities, and maybe some of them have remediation needs. So we find best practices, we find ways to work together at the federal level for appropriate funding and so forth. So being part of the RCLC kind of makes us part of this larger national community with, again, common interests. Next slide, please. So what we've compiled here is just to give you an idea of the accomplishments of the RCLC over the last several years. The laboratory went through a contract change about 2-3 years ago, if memory serves. And one of the issues in the new contract was what the commitment by the new contractor would be toward the local community in terms of relationships to the different governmental entities, support for local nonprofits, educational initiatives, and so forth. And those were written into the proposals by each of the bidders. And the RCLC executive director at the time organized a series of meetings with all the bidders that were coming to run the laboratory to make sure that every proposal had an appropriate level of what's called a community commitment plan. We also, the RCLC also successfully advocated for this new contractor, which it turned out was a nonprofit entity, to nevertheless pay state and local and regional gross receipts taxes. The law in New Mexico is that nonprofits were exempted from gross receipts taxes, but there was legislation changed so that any national or state research laboratory doing business in New Mexico would, even though it might have a nonprofit status, would nevertheless pay gross receipts taxes. And again, that was the late state, local, and mostly the regional gross receipts tax was to the Regional Transit Authority. The RCLC also wrote a document opposing efforts by the Department of Energy to, this is a little bit technical, but there was a question about what type of access external committees could have, external boards could have about the activities at the laboratory that relate to environmental and safety issues. And the RCLC wrote a letter to the Department of Energy supporting greater transparency and access. Again, the RCLC represents Northern New Mexico and the Energies Community Alliance, which is this national organization of governmental entities and other parties that are related to sites that have DOE activities. And as an example of the work that the RCLC can do at the federal level, with the prior administration, there was a much greater emphasis on funding the laboratory for its activities and reducing the funding for environmental remediation. And there was a $100 million difference between the president's budget and the budget that was actually passed by Congress. And it was an all hands on deck effort. But the RCLC had several conversations with our congressional delegation, with congressional committees, to try to make sure that funding was raised as appropriate for Los Alamos, and it was successful. So I think we can take some I guess credit for that successful advocacy. Next slide, please.
Okay, counselors, was that the end or was there one more slide?
There was one more slide, Madam Chair.
So Councilor Garcia, I think you were going to finish with this slide. Is that correct?
Yes, and please let me know when my computer's a little slow. It was going to cover the topics of what does the city of Santa Fe benefit from participating in the regional coalition?
And we can see the screen, Council.
Okay, great. And so as you can see, the first bullet mentions that it helps to create a unified voice of advocacy for the region. If the city of Santa Fe did not participate, sure, they can have a voice in the matters which what happens with the lab, but when there is a coalition of voices, it provides that much more advocacy effort. As Councilor Zrelevitz mentioned, it helps to provide more emphasis on the local procurement resources that can come into a particular community. There, and Councilor Zrelevitz, maybe you can give a definitive number, but there is over $100 million in procurement spent annually by Llano. And one of the focuses of the RCLC is to try to disperse those procurement resources in an equitable manner. And to add the voice about environmental remediation in the region and also provide transparency. That is a a very big issue for us. We want to ensure that the impact that LANL is having on the environment, that we hold them accountable, and environmental remediation is a priority of ours. And then lastly, it helps to provide and diversify the work that is conducted by LANL and into an additional topic such as renewable energy, biomedical areas. As we know that there was lots of studies being conducted up at LANL, even recently with the COVID-19 pandemic. I guess one last thing, and I'll ask Councilors Relevitz to clarify for us in regards to RCLC advocating for an increase of pit production. From my experience this past year, that has not been the case. And I don't know historically if that has been the case. And I know probably all of us on the Santa Fe City Council have heard from concerns from constituents in regards to RCLC is advocating for an expansion of pit production at LANL. That hasn't been my experience this past year, and I don't know if Councilor is Relevitz wants to expand on that.
Yes, I'd be glad to, Madam Chair, members of the committee. So the RCLC works on a consensus basis. Said we try really hard to find what are areas that all our members are in favor of, and so we have not taken up any issue regarded either to pit production or the national security mission of the laboratory or other issues that there might be a difference of opinion among the different communities. We really try to look hard for areas that are of common interest. Even little ones like the recent 2020 census, that having a full count was really important to us. So we try to find those types of areas. So the RCLC has not taken any position related to this about pit production at the laboratory.
Thank you, Councilors Relevitz. And with that, I guess we are open to any questions from committee members.
Great. And if you could just stop sharing your screen so we can see everybody, that helps me quite a bit. And Councilor Villarreal, you had pulled this item from our consent agenda, so you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the additional information in your PowerPoint. There's just a few questions I have and critiques about that. First, I'm just going to ask some questions related to the memo. So we heard this last year, and we had asked about what changed from the last version of the GPA, and if you could provide us with the red line, which we didn't receive. So I know there's some loose language as to what was potentially changed from the first GPA to this one. And I'm still wanting to know details. And I'm wondering if there's a red line that we can look at, so we know specifically what language changed.
Councilor Relevitz, are you going to be fielding questions, or Councilor Garcia, who or Kyle, or who's going to be responding?
Madam Chair, if I may volunteer to do that, because I have ready access and I can provide that at any time, that red line version of the JPA. I can also go over what are all the substantive changes, because sometimes the red line is a little busy because of formatting changes and so forth. So I did collect a summary of the changes, and I can go over those if that would be sufficient for Councilor Villarreal.
Yeah, I mean, what was in our memo wasn't helpful for me.
Mhm.
It was very general
Okay.
about fiscal agent role of Los Alamos County. So I'm just wanting to start off with that piece.
So the RCLC of the original Joint Powers Agreement had a very loose description of what the powers of the RCLC were as a corporate, some kind of entity. So it was not explicit that the RCLC could enter into contracts. It was not explicit as to whether the RCLC could hold real estate or incur debt. So we made those types of things explicit. So the RCLC can enter into contracts in new JIP. Some of these things might be kind of implied, but we wanted to make them implicit. So the JPA says that RCLC can enter contracts. It cannot hold real estate, and it cannot incur debt. It could also cannot employ staff. Executive director, should we return to have one, will be a service agreement, not employment. That's another change. It makes explicit that the RCLC can lobby, but only to the extent consistent with grant requirements. So for example, historically we received a grant from the Department of Energy, and those grant funds, like any federal grant funds, I presume one cannot lobby using those funds. So the JPA makes that explicit. It sets what our that we have to set a yearly budget and what our fiscal year is, and that it's subject to the Open Meetings Act. Another important change is that the original Joint Powers Agreement made Los Alamos County explicitly the fiscal agent, but now the RCLC can decide that another member of the organization can be the fiscal agent. And finally, that it was unclear how members could withdraw from the organization. It said by mutual consent, so it was unclear whether it would require the approval of all the members for an individual member to leave the RCLC. And now it's explicit that individually members can terminate their participation in the RCLC. So in my estimation, they were not major changes, except maybe for the issue of having a fiscal agent other than Los Alamos County. But those were kind of the most really all the substantive changes between the old and the new JPA.
Was there language in the old JPA about if a member decided to remove their membership, that they would not be reimbursed for any fees that they already paid?
I couldn't tell you. I don't recall anything to that level of specificity. I know that the issue of overpayment came up, I think, in the Finance Committee, and I guess it would be like any invoice that is overpaid or erroneously paid, that it would be reimbursed.
Well, I'm not talking about erroneously paid. I'm talking about the language that was added about, I can't find it at the moment, but there's language that says if a member decides that they want to remove themselves from the, say they decide that they no longer want to be a member, it says that they will not be reimbursed for the amount they paid. And I'm just wanting to know if that was original language.
Madam Chair, Member, Councilor Villarreal, I'm not familiar with that part of the JPA. I can check with my red line version to see if that was there originally or not.
Okay, I found the page. It's like on the new one, it's page 6 about member withdrawal. Any member may withdraw from this agreement by providing a written notice, but it says that such withdrawal shall not terminate this agreement as to the, well, okay, it moves on to the withdrawing member shall not be entitled to refund any of the funds it contributed to the coalition prior to withdrawal. So I'm just, if you could check on that for me, that would be great. The other question I had was about, we had asked about the original membership and if the roster had changed, and we're specifically talking about what has changed since the original from the new JPA. Have members actually removed themselves, or have you had any new membership? I'm just wondering if membership has changed. If anyone has left or if anyone has joined that weren't members before.
Madam Chair, Councilor, I don't, I believe that we have added new members. I would have to check, and I don't know of any member that has left. Again, the process by which members leave was unclear. So, I mean, honestly, I couldn't tell you. I suspect not, because I think that would have been something that we would have talked about. But I couldn't tell it. But I'm pretty sure that there have been members added since the original membership.
Right. Okay. So, and then in terms of the financial commitment, the city of Santa Fe has a 10,000 commitment. What's the commitment that Los Alamos County pays for their membership dues?
So if I recall correctly, prior to the time that we started getting a grant from the Department of Energy, we contributed about $100,000, and now we contribute $60,000.
And then, like, what are some of the pueblos contributing?
I would have to check with the recent financial statement. We do report on that on a monthly basis.
That's one thing that would be helpful to see a budget. I've never seen a budget for RCLC, to see how they break down costs, who's contributing. I know the majority of it comes from a DOE grant. And then there's other players that pay more, other members that pay less. So that would be good to know. And then also costs associated with this body. In the memo, and then also in the presentation, you talked about why the RCLC has historically focused on pursuing accelerated cleanup of waste at Lanel and steering away from issues around mission funding or support. And that didn't really make sense to me, mostly because from what I understand, the RCLC has spent $2 million since its inception, and there hasn't been any kind of accelerated cleanup based on them trying to push the envelope. And so I guess what I'm trying to understand is it's done the opposite, because RCLC has supported the 2016 consent order that the NMED, New Mexico Environment Department, is now suing the DOE to terminate. So that didn't make sense to me. And I guess I'm just not understanding. I don't feel like the objectives of DOE, I mean, they've increased since RCLC has been in existence. DOE has actually increased plutonium pit production to the amount of like 270%. And the cleanup is actually based on what DOE was trying to push. It's been actually, they've asked for half of that. So they're actually, the budgets don't align. DOE says, here, we'll give you more money for plutonium pit production, but they've actually decreased the amount of funding for cleanup. So I'm still trying to figure out how RCLC fits into that picture. And then simultaneously, we talk about the economic benefits. And while we know they are substantial on some level for community members to be to work at the lab, saying that you all push for that doesn't make sense. I mean, there was that article and the study that was done in August of 2020, UNM Bieber, the Bureau of Business and Economic Research study that determined that Lanel had a net economic loss for local governments surrounding Lanel, except for Los Alamos County. So this included Santa Fe County as well. I mean, all these things that it's hard for me to try to justify RCLC based on the history of the lab and then also the fact that it's kind of I feel like it's a conflict of interest. We have RCLC that's primarily funded by DOE funds, yet DOE doesn't necessarily listen to the resolutions that we put forth about reducing plutonium pit production. They don't ask us what we think as City of Santa Fe residents. So I guess I just feel like it's still this kind of political entity that doesn't necessarily represent the interests of the people. That's what's hard for me. It's like a unified voice, but we have a very different voice than our, colleagues that may come from different jurisdictions. So I don't feel like that's a unified voice per se. The other thing I was reading from the memo that I thought was interesting, it says that we cajoled that you all cajoled the DOE. I thought that was an interesting word. What did you mean by cajoled? Because I looked up cajoled. That could be like coaxing, or that could be like flattery. So what do you mean by that?
Madam Chair, I did not write the memo, so I can't answer that. May I answer a few of the other issues? It was a long list, so I apologize if there are things that you may need to remind me of. The laboratory cleanup, legacy cleanup, is a different budget item in recent years than the mission side of it. So now when you look at the total amount, so the laboratory as a whole is, and please don't hold me to it, but I think most recently it's about a $3 billion funding, and legacy cleanup is about 300 million. And again, so we can go to our congressional delegation and advocate for increases to the cleanup part of the portion without taking a position as to what we feel is about the operational side of the laboratory. And we know that every community surrounding Llano is interested in increasing that budget. I mean, that in a sense, that's the more budget there is, the more cleanup either accelerated or larger areas or whatever. And of course, Los Alamos County is where the most, if not all, of the legacy waste is located. So there's definitely very strong interest in Los Alamos County as an individual county and having that cleanup done as much as possible. So, and in the last, as I mentioned, the prior administration was really the emphasis was on the mission side and not on the cleanup. And it took a fair amount of presentations and education to push that back and to make sure that we got that $100 million back. So again, that was an important thing. In terms of the Beaver report, that's a very long conversation, but one of the things that came out in the discussion by the economist at UNM who did the report is that his assumption was that anyone that worked at the laboratory and if the laboratory was not there, that all those people would leave the area. And therefore they wouldn't have social needs or housing needs or whatever. Personally, I thought that was not a realistic expectation that everybody in northern New Mexico that used to work at the laboratory, if the laboratory were no longer there, they would magically find positions elsewhere and wouldn't. So that's just one example of, at least personally, issues that I had with that report that I thought were unrealistic. It did highlight that there is a substantial level of tax receipts, not just by Los Alamos County, certainly that has the majority because that's where a lot of the operations are, but it was a fair amount in surrounding counties. And the recent news show that the footprint of the laboratory is broadening, right, to the larger area. Another statistic is that more people work at the laboratory who live outside of Los Alamos County now than live inside Los Alamos County. So that just reiterates that. So,
Well, I guess
yeah.
what I think about are, all these points you made about what RCLC is doing to promote certain things. And I don't really feel like it has that kind of power. I think there's other forces, like even just saying that they were responsible for pushing for more cleanup. Well, I'd actually venture to say that community groups, watchdog groups, community members, and other groups are the ones that actually push to have more cleanup. They're the ones that actually have had a voice in that measure, not RCLC. I mean, if we didn't have community groups holding LANL accountable, we'd still be probably polluting water and communities. So I guess I just don't think RCLC has that kind of leveraging point. And it's not because I don't think the people care that sit on RCLC that you don't have a vested interest. It's just that feels like a political, it's political positioning by LANL and by DOE to say, yeah, we're doing something. We have RCLC. They're holding us accountable. And I just don't feel like your presentation and what I've seen of like what's happened at the lab has RCLC has that kind of clout. And so when you're saying, oh, well, we don't take on issues, we haven't advocated against expansion, or you haven't advocated for expansion of the plutonium pit production, but you all also haven't advocated against plutonium pit production. So in a way, it's like not really taking a stance. And it certainly doesn't speak for Santa Feans and what we hear from our constituents about what they care about as it relates to cleanup and really pushing the envelope on that and reducing plutonium pit production. So I guess there's a lot of other questions that I just don't understand about this entity. People may say, oh, it's only this a little bit of money. It shouldn't matter. Well, it does matter because it's about the principle of things, and having something that's, to me, functional. And RCLC has not been functional for a while. In fact, I know in your presentation you said about, well, David Koss supported it. I bet if we asked him today, he probably wouldn't. So I'd love to hear his stance on that. But, back then it may have made sense. Yeah, let's look at this coalition. Let's see what it can do. But I think the track record is still very watered down. And I don't feel like there's, like, even just saying the things that you support other than the national security aspect. Well, I mean, I've still been waiting for LANL to give me a breakdown of like what their actually budget consists of, what those science programs consist of, because from what I've heard, those science programs, the actual funding for them has been reduced. It was 74 million in 2020, and those science programs were reduced to 62 million in fiscal year 2021. So all that to say is that I don't think that right now it makes sense the way it's structured for RCLC for the city of Santa Fe to have to be a member, a dues paying member at this time. And I'll yield the floor for now.
Okay, other questions from the committee? Councilor Rivera.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, David, for being here and making a presentation and answering questions. So there are, it looks like 9 people that sit on the board. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, I think so. Maybe Councilor Garcia can double check for me, but I believe that there are 9 members.
All right, that's what I counted, and I guess in the last 12 months or past year, you guys meet quarterly. Have you had a quorum every time you meet?
We meet almost monthly. We have had at times issues with quorum, but I think over the last several meetings, we have been able to meet.
All right. I thought in here that you met quarterly. Has that changed or?
The bylaws, my understanding is that the bylaws require quarterly meetings, but we have what we call special meetings, but they're essentially every month.
Okay. So, I'm not very familiar with this committee. So will you just give me an idea? So part of your authority is to promote economic development, new missions, stable funding of LANL's missions. Can you tell me how that works? You from getting all in a meeting, trying to figure out what you're going to support and where you go from there?
Yeah, that I can tell at least my personal experience, and it kind of goes back to Councilor Villarreal's question about what is the impact of the RCLC. So Los Alamos County has its own federal legislative committee and agenda, and I've served on that. And Los Alamos goes to Washington, D.C. typically in March to talk about the areas that we are interested in. But I've also attended as part of the RCLC, and there we go with Mayor Sanchez of Española and other representatives of other communities. And we talk about some things that are similar. Los Alamos County always talks about environmental cleanup, but as the RCLC, we're representing a different constituency, right? A broader geographic area, and we're asking about procurement, we're asking about educational programs, we're asking about, again, areas of interest. And I think it does have an impact to say that this isn't just something that Los Alamos individually is interested in or another individual organization, but both large and small communities would benefit from this. Communities that have a large presence at the laboratory and communities that don't, that this is something that the whole region is interested in. And that is important to our congressional delegation. It is important to the Department of Energy because they know that we can go talk to our delegation if there are issues. And so again, I don't know there's a way to quantify, which delegation put it over the edge, but I think the more people, the more organizations that go talk and have a common message, I think the more important that is. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of some of the work that the RCLC has done in terms of that lobbying. The other aspect that I think was mentioned about what's the interest of DOE in having the RCLC. When DOE wants to determine what kind of the cleanup priorities they should be and the level of cleanup and what they should be concentrating on and so forth, it is important to them to know, for example, what the end uses might be of an area that they're doing cleanup on, right? And that depends on the community. So they want to know what the community thinks. They want to educate the community as to what their progress is, answer questions, maybe correct some misconceptions about what they're doing and why they're doing it and so forth. And that's really what this grant that they provide, not just to historically to the RCLC, but to other communities around the country for similar reasons, to educate the community, to learn from the community as to what their priorities are. So this grant that the RCLC gets is not unique to the RCLC. I believe that there are other grants like that. I'm also an officer of the Energy Communities Alliance, which is the national organization it also gets substantial grants from the Department of Energy, also to support that kind of national educational process. So I hope that that answers a little bit of what the role of the RCLC is vis-a-vis the DOE and congressional delegations and so forth.
Thank you. And in your presentation, you gave me an example of the work you do for dealing with contamination and cleanup. So thank you for that. Is there anyone from LANO or DOE or the federal government on the coalition?
Do you mean?
Is there a representative? Do they attend your meetings? Do they have a say in what happens?
No, the only members of the board have to be our elected representatives from each of the governing bodies. We do have the alternate can be, and often it, for example, might be the city manager or county manager who may be the alternate, but the representation on the board is by the elected officials.
So how does LANO have communication or understand, I guess, what the board is trying to work on or has been working on or might be working on?
So we do have sometimes attendees. I think now with Zoom, it's a little bit different. We also invite, we've had presentations by the director of the laboratory, by the deputy director, where we ask them specific questions. We also have individual contacts that we can talk to. There are government relations people. So that those are kind of the interactions that we have.
And did I hear Councilwoman Villarreal say that some of your funding comes from DOE?
Yes, so about half our funding comes from contributions by members. It's a little over $100,000. And historically, we've also had a grant from the Department of Energy of about $100,000. And again, there's limits to what those grants can be used for. While the contributions by individual members, can be used for any purpose, but the DOE grant funds have to be used for educational purposes, for convening, understanding what the community wants, the types of things that I talked about earlier that DOE is interested in getting from us. And again, I mentioned that it's not that the Energy Communities Alliance, which is like the national version of the RCLC, also receives substantial grants, and they also have the same limitations. They have to be accounted for separately and so forth. So,
right. And similar to Councilwoman Villarreal, I had a question about what each entity on the coalition contributes to this. You said just over 100,000. So just wondering if we're all contributing the same or if it's broken up differently.
No, I think the range goes from, if I recall correctly, from $2,500 by some communities to $10,000 by several communities. And then Los Alamos County contributes $60,000, which given that a larger percentage of the employment or the residents of Los Alamos are employed at the laboratory and things like that, that was kind of a historical agreement that predates me as to what the level of each community's contribution was.
And then who's the fiscal agent currently for the coalition?
So Los Alamos County is the fiscal agent. In the last year, we have developed new, I guess the term is internal controls, so that there's more approvals that are done at the board level. So the board now approves every individual check that is paid, every invoice, and Los Alamos County is the fiscal agent, but I'm also treasurer of the RCLC, so I can tell you that basically they hold the checkbook, and they do write the checks and sign the checks because they're the signatories of the accounts, but only under upon approval by the board.
And
And
I
they
didn't
also
see any.
assist with, auditing, things like that.
Thank you. That was my next question. I didn't see anything in here about auditing, but I assume that's then through Los Alamos County.
Yeah, so as fiscal agent, the auditor would come to Los Alamos County and look at our books. We do have a contracted accounting firm. That's another thing that Los Alamos County no longer does. We have an outside accountant, we have an outside legal, and then of course we had an outside auditor that completed.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Counselor Cassett Sanchez, you're next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Follow up briefly on the questions about the different dues that the different communities pay. How are those formulas determined of who pays how much?
So that predates me. I know that there's some understanding about the relative economic impact. I think that's, but I couldn't tell you kind of what the formulaic approach was. The dues contributions have not changed, at least in my tenure or familiarity with the RCLC. So at some point in the past, they were set at a certain level, and then communities have just contributed that.
Okay, and then in terms of influence, does each of the 9 board members have the same level of influence on the decisions and actions of the RCLC? Is it one vote, one member?
It is. We do have an executive board, executive committee that can have meetings, kind of special meetings between regular board meetings. Currently, the chair of the RCLC is Commissioner Roybal of Santa Fe County. The vice chair is Councilor Fernandez of Town of Taos, and the secretary is Mayor Sanchez of Española.
Thank you. And then just, I think one thing I'm trying to kind of still wrap my brain around is how the decisions of what the focus is, and I'm sorry, I know that you've spoken to this a little bit more, but of RCLC are. So, for example, you mentioned that at this moment, there's been more focus on environmental cleanup, not as much focus on potential mission of LANL or that piece. And how is that decision made around taking a position or not taking a position, for example, as Councilwoman Villarreal was mentioning on plutonium pit production? Is that something that essentially any member of the coalition could come to the table and say, hey, this is something I'd like us to focus on, and then essentially the board votes?
Councilor Garcia can maybe share his observations as well. But as I mentioned, we understand that there's a diversity of interests within the RCLC. There's a diversity of interests within each of the communities that belong to the RCLC, right? Some portions of the community are more interested in environmental issues. Other parts of the community or members are as interested about workforce issues and employment issues and maintenance. So we have to thread that needle as an organization that tries to have a unified voice when we speak to the outside community. So we all understand that we all have different constituencies, and we, like I said, we try hard to find the areas that are common. I mean, it would not be very effective or as effective to go to Washington, D.C. and say, here's what we would like you to do on a vote of 5-4, right? We want to say every member of, this was a unanimous thing that we're all interested in. Cleanup, we are all interested in. Supporting our educational institutions so that the laboratory will have a healthy workforce to choose from. That's something that we're in common with. You know, we want the contractor to use part of the fee that it collects to turn it back around for support of the community. One little statistic is when I was talking to somebody about it, they said, well, did you know that Llano is one of the biggest contributors to food pantries in the area? Well, I didn't know that, but I'm glad they do. And if they weren't, I would be questioning that. I mean, as the largest employer, one of the largest employers in northern New Mexico, they should also be contributing to alleviating some of the social needs in our community. That's just being a good citizen. And that's something that we can all get behind, and we can say, if the laboratory falls behind on that responsibility, then we can go to the laboratory first, and if the laboratory or the contractor doesn't listen to us, then we can go to other influencers that might be effective. So I hope that helps. And Councilor Garcia, is that kind of consistent with how you see the work? If I may, I don't want to speak for the RCL. I'm giving you my interpretation of how that works.
Councilor Garcia, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Try to answer Councilor Casas-Sanchez's question. Sure, thank you, Madam Chair. Councilor Casas-Sanchez, I don't feel I would have any problem bringing forth any issue that the governing body would want me to bring forth to RCLC. We have to remember that I am a representative, so I can't speak on behalf of the city. Any issue would be brought forth by the governing body, and then I can bring it up to RCLC. So, for example, if the city passed a resolution saying we want to stop pit production, and this is an example, I would take that forth to RCLC and see if there was support at RCLC for that. So hopefully that answers your question. I think it's very open. I think there's nothing that limits me from as a member to bring forth any concerns that I have. That the city would have. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that the city might want me to bring forth.
Thank you, Councilor. So for example, we just passed the resolution that Councilwoman Villarreal and Councilor Lindell sponsored about the SWICE. Were you able to, is that an example of something that you'd be able to bring to RCLC to potentially gather further support from the rest of the coalition?
Yes.
Am I understanding that process correctly?
Yes, I could. So during comments from the membership, similar to the way we have comments from the governing body, I can bring it up then, or I can have it as a request to have it as an agenda item during the meeting.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate hearing your experience of representing Santa Fe. Okay, I don't think I have any further questions. I do think that, what I know I'm struggling with, I cannot speak for my other colleagues, is again, just the understanding of the return and the tangible impacts of RCLC. And I do know that there has been, my understanding, some changes within RCLC's staff and leadership, if I am correct, with the executive director. Am I correct in that understanding? Renee, your Councilwoman Villarreal, your in the last few years, correct, or no? I'm getting yeses and nos.
Maybe it better to go to the counselors who are actually sit. I think last I heard, isn't that position open at the moment?
If I may, Madam Chair.
Yes, please, Counselor.
It is open at this point, yes.
Okay, thank you. So I think just understanding, again, what are the tangibles that we get out of this, and how does this support our community? And I think for me, it's this piece of wanting to make sure that we do have a voice at the table, and then understanding what that voice brings us, and potentially a little bit more focus from the governing body moving forward if we do, continue to participate in both what's coming out of there, as well as looking at where we want our representative to be bringing things forward. And I believe that's where I am right now. Is I don't think I'm quite ready to give up my voice at the table, but I do want to know a bit more regularly what that voice is getting and what that's bringing forward. And so I think that might be something that is something that we should talk about as a governing body of how do we as a group look at some of our focuses and what we would like Councilor Garcia to represent on our behalf, as well as how do we start to get some information back on what the tangible return is of us being there. So I think that's going to take a little bit more discussion. I believe, Kyle, that would be something that you would be our staff member that we would work with on that. So those are my thoughts at the moment. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Rivera, your hand is still up. I'm not sure if it's an old hand or a new hand. It is first on my list.
Sorry, old hand.
Okay, so then Counselor Villarreal, back to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. While I appreciate that Councilor Garcia wants to take on some of the topics that we've pushed for in this particular governing body, previous to him, we actually had quite a few resolutions stating our stance on plutonium pit production, and it's gone on deaf ears. So I don't still think that the RCLC is the entity to push our agenda, because of the fact there's varying interests and maybe even values. And when we say about that common message about lobbying, and with all due respect, Councilor Israelovitz, Los Alamos County explicitly supports expanded plutonium pit production, and it's a priority in your budget, and you all lobby for those efforts. And so that to me is somewhat of a conflict, like the fact that you all contribute the majority of the remainder of the funding source, 60,000 out of the 100,000, and then the rest comes from DOE. I still think that we would have our voice still wouldn't be heard, even if Councilor Garcia put forth some of the resolutions that of our stances. So I'm still uncertain about that. And it's no criticism, Los Alamos County, that's what they choose to do. It's just that then it creates an unlevel playing field for us. And we contribute only a certain amount. And think about the Pueblos, they only contribute 3,500 or less. So I feel for them. I mean, do they have a say in some of the things that come forth that RCLC wants to push? So I still think it's still unequal, and that we can look at other ways that we can leverage our values, and RCLC isn't the entity to do that. So I'm just going to stop there. I guess it's just hard for me to even think like Henry Roybal, Commissioner Roybal, he serves as the chair of RCLC, but he's also a Lano employee. So I don't know. It's kind of complicated. And I just feel like there's other ways that we can leverage or wield our influence to show where we stand in terms of, our relationship with Lano and the things that we'd like to see. And RCLC isn't that entity. Thank you.
Okay, other questions from the committee at this point? I would just add, I believe the Councilor Israelovitz started this presentation tonight talking about the Municipal League. which is a body that he and I both are members on. And, maybe that serves as a model for how this group takes on, the consensus items. Certainly, I will tell you that municipalities across this state are not all in agreement on all issues. And we have processes for how we determine what the municipal league staff, what the executive director lobbies for at the state legislature. And we have a very diverse group of people and interests. And, maybe that is a model for how this group moves forward. Certainly, to Councilor Cassett Sanchez's point, the North Central Regional Transit District Board, she's the current representative of Santa Fe to that board. I served on that when I was first elected. They have weighted voting, and maybe that's something. I do think that some of the membership dues are probably based on, I know for the North Central Regional Transit District Board, the membership amounts are based on gross receipts tax revenues. And so, you look at what the capacity of a particular local government is to pay, and it's, it's a scale. So it doesn't necessarily mean you have more voice or less voice. But there are models for how you determine things like that. And so as this group recovers from its illustrious past, maybe they'll look at other groups that represent regional interests and look for models about how to be a better organization. And I'm hopeful for that. So those are my thoughts. What's the pleasure of the committee?
Madam Chair, has this passed any other committees, or is this, I think finance referred it back to quality of life. I don't know if it's going back to finance or.
No, I think it was at governing body. It had already been through finance. Kyle's shaking his head. All right, Kyle, maybe, or Jennifer, somebody. Got to unmute though, Kyle.
I do apologize, Madam Chair. Counselor, the first time we went to quality of life, there were some questions regarding budget. So we did take some time to regroup and compile the memo that was compiled through answers from RCLC membership. From there, we went to Finance Committee, and then they, in the closing of that agenda item, said that we did not need to go back to Finance Committee, but they referred back to quality of life to answer some of these pertinent questions that came up that pertain to this committee.
Okay, thank you. So it would go to governing body. And I believe it's passed out of finance, so it
Madam Chair, I think it moved forward with no recommendation.
Okay, so that they did move it out. Okay, what's the will of the committee?
Since no one wants to make a motion, I'll move to deny the joint powers agreement.
Is there a second?
I'll second for discussion.
Okay, we have a motion from Councilor Villarreal. We have a second from Councilor Rivera to deny the JPA agreement. Questions? Councilor Cassett Sanchez, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If he's comfortable, I would actually really like to hear from Councilor Garcia. As somebody who has the most experience of being on this, if you are willing to share some of your thoughts and your experience being on RCLC, I would find that beneficial.
Sure, Madam Chair, Councilor Cassidy Sanchez, when I came on board with RCLC, it was in the middle of a transition year. So I think that's probably been, left me with little context in regards to the potential of the commission or the committee. I do see that there is potential for action to be moved forward. The presentations that I've been given by whether it's local groups or the groups in charge with cleanup, there has been active engagement. And I would hate to see the city of Santa Fe lose a seat at the table. I think the access and the engagement through the members that are currently engaged with RCLC is very active. I think the challenges that I've seen in regards to potential quorum issues is that we have to remember we're all elected officials, and there are instances where we are unfortunately not able to make a meeting, which might put a meeting in jeopardy for quorum. I don't recall that has happened a lot in my 1 year. I would venture to say it hadn't happened maybe more than twice within this past year, and that's just going off of my recollection. And that's with meetings being every month. So with that being said, Councilor Cassidy Sanchez, I think with the new leadership after the prior executive director left, there is opportunity for new leadership to really regain focus on what the future of RCLC should look like. I think that if the governing body is willing to look at this as a 1 year, let's see what happens, and revisit it within 1 year and come back, and I'm more than happy to provide not only quarterly updates to the governing body during governing body meetings, but also come back in 1 year and say, look, this is what has been accomplished this past year, and it might allow the governing body to make the decision to continue or exit. I would suggest if we go that route, we do so within a time frame before any potential dues would be paid, because I would not want to put the city in a situation where we make a decision to potentially leave RCLC and we are not able to recoup the resources. Because I am in agreement with Councilor Villarreal, whether it's $10,000, $10 or $1 million, this is all taxpayer resources, and we got to be good stewards of the resources that we've been entrusted with. So I guess those are my thoughts, that it's been a transition year, and I would suggest we see what can be accomplished in the next year. And if we feel like if it's still not meeting our needs, then we can make the appropriate decision at that time.
Thank you very much, Councilor Garcia. I really very much appreciate getting your viewpoint on this and that opinion. That's, I think, kind of where I've been leaning, is looking at moving forward with staying in this year, especially, I do believe that we've already paid those dues. And so those dues, my understanding of the JPA is correct, and that has not been changed. They cannot be recouped. Is that accurate, Council Israelovitz? Do you know if that's accurate? I don't think we've gotten a straight answer on this. I've heard both yeses and nos here, and I'd love a solid answer.
Madam Chair, Councilor Cassidy Sanchez, I'm not familiar with that section. We do have legal counsel for the RCLC, and I would just defer to Ms. Long to opine on that. I wouldn't want to make a commitment either way. I was not familiar with that phrase. I just thought, well, if somebody overpaid an invoice, you refund the invoice just like you would refund anybody else. But I wouldn't be able to say more than that. I apologize.
I appreciate that. And I suppose, that would be good information for us to get moving forward. But that's all. Thank you, Counselor. I do think both counselors, but thank you, Counselor Garcia, for sharing your thoughts on this as the individual who is sitting there and who has that experience. I really appreciate hearing your viewpoint.
Okay, Counselor Villarreal, you have your hand up. Is that an old hand or a new hand?
New hand, just
Okay.
to clarify. And I appreciate that Counselor Garcia is sitting on RCLC, and there has been limitations as to his experience because of the current situation and the transition. I don't feel like we would lose a seat at the table if we took a break, whether it's a year, and have them organize and be clear about what they want to do, and have an executive director and actually have a fiscal sponsor or agent, and have it all get cleared up. I just feel like I think there's a lot of things that are still unknown, and I would rather us not approve this JPA and not be a member, to show that we take this seriously, and we take it seriously that our role on the RCLC is that we're not going to just keep waiting to see what's going to happen like we've been doing the past few years. And so I just feel like we need to be clear about the fact that we want to see changes. And the only way I feel like we're going to see that is if we actually take ourselves out of the RCLC until we can determine how we can be more, like, our values are going to be represented on that on that board, and also just how the organizational structure could better serve us. Because right now I feel like having different elected officials isn't the way to go. We also need to hear from community members, and I don't feel like that body necessarily allows to hear for people that are most impacted by the laboratory, that they get their views heard. So I still stand by my my motion.
Okay. And I would just comment that I think we should be part of those conversations where, as they work to, rebuild and get their house in order. And so I think I kind of agree with Councilor Garcia that, staying in and shaping what the future looks like would be a good role for us. I also would point out that this did pass without recommendation out of finance, so it's still going back to governing body, no matter what we do here with this particular motion. So just so everybody's clear about the implications of this motion. If there are no other questions, we'll go to a roll call. Are there any other questions from the committee, comments, debate? Jennifer, can you call the roll on the motion to deny the JPA?
Yes. Councilwoman Renee Villarreal.
Yes.
Councilor Jamie Cassett Sanchez.
No.
Councilor Michael Garcia.
You're muted, Councilor.
Hear me? Sorry about that. I'm going to abstain since I presented tonight.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. You were garbled.
No, I apologize.
It's not coming through.
I heard abstain because he presented. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct, Jennifer.
All right, you came through this time. That
Thank
first
you.
time you didn't. I don't know what happened there. Sometimes it's my internet, so I never know. Okay, sorry, Jennifer.
No problem. Councilor Chris Rivera.
I'm going to abstain as well until we get the other information that we asked for regarding contributions, who contributes and how much everyone contributes. Since this is moving forward anyway, I'd also like to see what my other colleagues have to say.
And Chair Carol Romero Worth.
No. So I believe then that motion fails. So I think we still need another motion.
So based on what I'm hearing from the body, I'd like to move this forward without recommendation because I don't believe, I think that that's going to be the motion that's going to move us forward. So I'd like to move forward without recommendation.
Second.
All right, we have a motion from Councilor Cassett Sanchez, a second from Councilor Rivera. Is there discussion?
So clarify the motion again. And I just want to be clear, in finance, we moved this back to quality of life, but we didn't move it out of finance. We just weren't going to hear it again. So I don't really understand. That's not necessarily
I think we moved it without recommendation. That's what I heard from Kyle. Which just means it just keeps moving. It's just this committee isn't saying what they want.
So are we then voting to move this forward without a recommendation?
Yeah, to the full governing body for a full conversation about what to do. Other comments, questions? Jennifer, do you want to take the roll on this one?
Sure. Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez.
Yes.
Counselor Michael Garcia.
You're still muted, Counselor. I don't know what's going on.
Abstain?
Got it. Counselor Chris Rivera.
Yes.
Councilwoman Renee Villarreal.
No, and I'd like to explain my vote after.
And Chair Carol Romero Worth.
Yes. All right, so that motion passes. Councilor Villarreal, to explain your vote.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I'm not voting for this because I'm clear about my stance on this. And so I'm not willing to move it forward because I don't think we should be, well, I guess my point of view is that I don't think we should be part of our CLC, but I'd also like to request before we go to governing body that we see the operating budget and also the bylaws. Thank you.
Okay. We are then moving on to the final item of the night, which is 6D. Jennifer, can you read that caption, please?
Yes, it's a request for approval of collective bargaining agreement, a union contract between the Santa Fe Police Officers Association and the City of Santa Fe. And Deputy Chief Ben Valdez will be presenting this item.
And I'm sorry, I misspoke a little bit. This is our last item on the consent agenda. We still have a presentation from Director Brown on CARES Act, small business impact and future federal and state funding. So with that, we'll go to Councilor Villarreal. I believe you pulled this item as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of clarifying questions for staff. Remind us when the last collective bargaining agreement contract was updated.
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, the last one that went through was approved was in July of 20. So went into effect July of 2020. So this one was supposed to be, well, actually this one's supposed to go into effect July of 2020. The one prior was July of 2019. But this is the one that is for July. It's supposed to go into effect July of 2020, but it was delayed due to the pandemic and some of the challenges we're experiencing.
Okay, so it was already up, the time frame was up and we were supposed to renew, and then it was delayed due to various the pandemic, et cetera. But so we're on schedule, right? I mean, kind of. We're behind, but we're following a regular schedule of updating. correct?
Yes, Counselor, our hope is to get this contract approved. Once it's approved, we're going back into negotiations and we're going to work to try to have an agreement that'll hopefully go into place by July of this year, so we can be back on track, and then we will be right where we need to be.
Okay. And the other question was, who makes up the management team for negotiations from the city side?
Madam Chair, Councilor Bedial, so I'm the chair for that management team. I also have Deputy Chief Paul Joy, Captain Anthony Tapia, Miss Anna Marie Bowen, and we also have let's see, a representative from HR and from the city attorney's office, and I can get you their names.
So mostly management from PD, and then there's a HR representative and city attorney, not city manager, right?
That's correct, Councilor.
Okay. And then I was trying to figure out, there was a change about, if I can find it. It was page 41, I think, but in the memo, it talks about a change that occurred. Sorry, Prime Glove is slow today. One of the changes had to do with something around the city manager. I'm trying to open the language here. Because you actually outlined 3 different changes.
Yes, Councilor. So the item is concerning the disciplinary process, and it mostly addressed the timelines with having the predetermination hearing taking place when discipline is being recommended, and then the employee's timeline to be able to have their concerns heard before the chief of police. The time limit that the chief has to provide their recommendation to the city manager, and then the time that's allowed for the employee to petition the city manager with their case and say, here's why I don't believe that this should be imposed or to this level.
Did it expand that timeline?
No, Councilor. What it did was it clarified it with the previous agreement. The employee had 15 days after the chief provided their recommendation of what the discipline is going to be imposed. And they could file their rebuttal anywhere from day 1 through day 15. They could file it on the last day. Right there, there's a big issue, because if the city manager looks at the case and by day 10, they say, I either concur or don't concur with the recommendation, it can have an effect if that employee waits until the end of that time to submit their petition. With the new contract, what it states is they have 5 days from the time that the chief provides their recommendation to petition the city manager. And then once that petition is received, the city manager has 15 days to provide a response to the employee. And that allows an opportunity also for the employee to request a conversation with the city manager, which can be entertained at the city manager's discretion.
Thank
And
you.
one other thing that we clarified too was it said working days, and we changed it to business days. Reason being is, as you know, fire department, police department, and other agencies, they have working days which run through the weekend. We wanted it to be business days. So if the city was not open for a holiday, then that would not count against the employee for their time duration. So just so everyone has a clear playing field on what the time limits are.
Got it. Thank you. And then the other thing that changed was compensation. The salary increases that were in the original document were from fiscal year 2019. And the updates were what we had changed last year, the classification amounts, where we kind of equalized those pay scales. Is that what that was?
Madam Chair, Councilor Varela, so we had to take out the percentage increases. If not, then they would rate an increase. And this year there was no financial funding available to make that happen. So we had to remove those increases, but we still have them at their current rate of pay as a result of the last contract's increase. So there was no reduction in pay. However, there was no increase in pay either. It stayed pretty much a flat budget in the area of pay.
I thought we did make some changes based on like current standards of different classifications, and we made those adjustments accordingly. And is that what's reflected in here, or this is not the document that would show that?
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, it is not reflected here. With the previous contract, what it did was it brought up their base rate of pay. So this was following like the comp and class, everything else, where the other city departments went through comp and class. Those that were out of comp and class, that was rectified. Also with the 2019 contract for FY19. But as of right now, we just kept it as a flat budget, again, due to the financial situation. There was nothing that would permit us to provide for increases at this point. So we kept it as a flat budget. So our employees' pay was neither increased nor decreased. We just took off that percentage, because had it stayed in with the new language and set for FY, 21-22, then we would have to have funding to support that, and we didn't have funding this year.
Okay, thank you. And then the last change was about lateral officer, retired officer hire program, that there was added language to clarify when lateral hires are eligible to test for the positions of detective and sergeant. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, ma'am. Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal. So under the previous contract, the big issue that we had was you'd have to spend the same amount of time as a lateral officer with the department to test for detective as you would for sergeant. What that did was that kind of put us in a situation where, why test for detective when I can test for sergeant right now? So one of the things that we addressed was we aligned the time in service with our other staff to where, regardless if you start with us or if you come as a lateral officer, you have to spend 7 years with the agency in order to qualify to test for sergeant. On the other side as well, we saw that on our recruiting side, we're kind of missing an item with our laterals where we're having them spend, again, 3 years with the department before they can test for detective. Now, if we have someone, I always look at one of our tenured detectives, Detective Trujillo. Everyone knows him. If Detective Trujillo was recruited by an agency, he has such a wealth of knowledge. I'd hate to put him on patrol for 3 years and then try to put him in detectives at that point. So we changed that. So as long as they have the years in service, and what it comes down to is 3 years of service as a police officer and off probation, a lateral officer can test for detective. And that is also congruent with our current staff. So our current staff can also test for detective after 3 years of service with the department. So that benefits us, because if we do have a lateral candidate that comes in that has experience as an investigator or supervisor, and they can bring that wealth of knowledge to our agency and assist us, that gives them that opportunity. So it was a win in both aspects. The other side too is with the composition of our department, because we have a lot of officers that are young in their career, that helps us also fill that void of experience as well for detectives, because some of our officers on patrol were not really showing interest in being a detective. We saw that change recently the last year, but that gave us a little bit of room in the event we do get a lateral that has that experience. Again, it doesn't guarantee that they will become a detective. It just provides them an opportunity to test and compete for that position.
Good to know. Thanks for the clarity. I don't have any other questions, Madam Chair.
Other questions from the committee? What's
Madam Chair.
Oh, yes, Councilor Rivera, sorry.
Sorry, DC Valdez, on 18BE, it talks about a qualifying military lateral hired. How many of those military lateral hired do we have in the department, and how many were hired before July 1st, 2020?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera. So right now we have one that's in the process. He's looking to get hired here, I think about April 5th. So right now we submitted his paperwork because the contract is not approved. He will fall under the prior contract where he will have his years of service as a military police officer recognized. He still has to go through the certified waiver through the state of New Mexico to be certified as a law enforcement officer within the state of New Mexico. But anyone following that candidate, they will fall under the contract if it is approved. Prior to that, offhand, I could think of about 3 to 4 military laterals that we did have that came in. We're very fortunate with a number of them. They had experience that they were bringing to the table. They adapted very quickly to civilian law enforcement and the protocols that we utilize. But we also saw some of them, it was a bit more of a challenge because a military policeman or security police officer in the military is going to be different than conventional law enforcement in our community. The reason being is their jurisdiction is on a post. And when they're on a post, if you don't act accordingly, the repercussions for a member of the military is going to be a lot different than someone who has an infraction in our community. For example, if you get a traffic infraction, they can say, all right, cool, you're going to get docked your pay, you're going to get this and that, and you have to go pick up trash. Where in our system, you're given the penalty assessment, you can elect to go do community service in lieu of paying the penalty assessment. And it's a different process of doing so. The other side too is they're dealing with members of the military. So it's a bit different than dealing with people in our community. So we recognize that, and what we want to do is we want them to come in at the entry level so they can gain that experience as a police officer in our community. We are recognizing that they do have the military service. So the big benefit is they've already attended a law enforcement academy through the military, either through military police school. And for the most part, that's pretty consistent with what they do. Most of them go to the same school across all branches of services. So it's pretty consistent training, which is good. But we build on that foundation by sending them to the NMLEA and giving them those basic skills that they need, like we would a cadet out of the academy. And we're hopeful that's going to be very helpful for our agency. That'll help us, again, build those values and mold those officers to be great officers, and also help them transition from being a military police officer to, a police officer for the city of Santa Fe.
And can you explain to me one more time why he'll fall under, or he or she will fall under this qualification if they're not going to be hired? Well, they will be hired after July. So you see that one person coming on in a couple weeks?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, yes, sir. So right now, when we submitted the packet for hire and we offered that hire, it was under the current contract. So the current contract that stands is the one that recognizes their years of military service. If this were to be live today and we didn't have that paperwork done, then he would fall under the new contract that we have in front of us.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Counselor. Other questions from the committee? What's the will of the committee?
I'll move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion to approve by Counselor Rivera, second by Counselor Cassett Sanchez. Jennifer, can you take the roll, please?
Yes, Madam Chair. Counselor Michael Garcia,
Yes.
Counselor Chris Rivera,
Yes.
Councilwoman Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
and Chair Carol Romero Worth.
Yes. All right. Thank you, Chief and Deputy Chief, for being here. We're moving on to action items for discussion. There are none. So from there, we'll move to presentations, and we have Director Brown with us to talk about the CARES Act, small business impact, and then future federal state funding. Welcome, and sorry we're running late tonight. Glad you're here. Take it away.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm on a different time zone, so it's good. It's good. And good evening to everyone, members of the council, Madam Chair. Let me just share my screen and I'll find my deck. Okay, so I was going to just present an overview of the CARES Act grant that we did for businesses, small businesses and nonprofits, and then take you through some of the programs, grants, loans, et cetera, that are in the pipeline on a state level and also on a federal level. And then once the federal ARP program is underway, I will come back again and sort of talk about what are we doing from a economic recovery and relief standpoint. So I'll take you through these slides and we'll figure out what's next. So some background on this CARES Act emergency financial program. The city and county partnered together to provide this CARES Act program of $3.8 million. And we had to create an application in like 3 weeks to put this together because the money was going to run out in December 31st. So we decided to work with the county and the small town of Edgewood because we thought we could maximize our capacity and serve our constituents. I knew up front that most of the money would go to the city of Santa Fe, but strategically it was a great idea to sort of merge everyone together because our businesses really don't know the border between the city and the county. And so that partnership worked that way. So the county helped us with grant management, procurement, and setting up the review committee. And then we were in charge, the city, of making sure that we did outreach to businesses to get them into the program. We had a number of local partners work with us to distribute the funds, actually to help with the applications and distributing the funds. We had North Central New Mexico Economic Development District, Dream Screen. We had some contractors in the end. And then the review committee was the ultimate review with the grant manager when the applications came through. And we advertised on many channels in English and Spanish. And there was a total of about 900 businesses that were eligible to participate in the program. And total businesses that participated were 446, and I show a broke down in a second. So some rules that had with it was based upon businesses that had revenue up to $5 million in 2019 or earlier. No startup businesses were allowed to apply, or new businesses, because it was based upon your prior year's revenue. Originally we set at $2 million and it was raised to $5 million. And then some of the grants were funded through it was loss of revenue between a period of March and December of the year before. So that's where we looked at who could qualify for this program. And so it went through the partners to the grant manager. The grant manager reviewed the applications, went to the review committee, and that's when the grant money was dispersed through the county. So some results from that. There was a total of 171 businesses and nonprofits that were awarded. As you can see, 84% of them came from the city of Santa Fe. We doled out $3.7 million in funding with another $91,000 in administration fee for the application support and the grant manager, et cetera. And so we spent about 97% of the money for this program. The highest award was $25,000. I'm sorry, average amount was 21.7, but the highest award did come up to 25,000. We originally had it at 15, but we realized that in the time that was left, we wanted to give as much out as possible to those programs or those companies and nonprofits that could be eligible. We did have 223 businesses that did not receive any grant funding, mainly because of the late in-game aspect. It was a lot of information that had to be compiled in time, and we had to spend it all by December 31st. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to queue them up for the next grant program. Since we have all their information in the system, we're trying to queue them up so that if we get our federal ARP money, we can do it from there. And we have to sort of work with the state possibly if it doesn't come directly to the city or county. Here's a cross section of some of the businesses and organizations that received awards. As I said, there was 171 of them that received awards, some nonprofit, some for-profit. Some of the lessons learned, we recognize that the next time any grant funding comes through, that we're going to look for a tech application. There was so much paperwork, it just slowed down the process. And we only had less than 3 months to put the program out there. And so having a tech program would have actually helped us put information in and process the grants there. Another issue that we learned is that some of the federal business agencies like SBDC weren't really allowed to participate because they were already getting federal money and we needed that sort of local agency to help us process them. But they couldn't apply to the RFP and we had to send the grants or send the constituent businesses to them on the side because they weren't officially allowed to accept money for services. We had less than 60 days to process the claims. And so that's, as I said, that we made it through 171 with 223 that still did not make it, but we're hoping in the next round that they're first in line. And then we also recognize that we might have to spend more for small business support services, just so that we can have some time to train our support ecosystem so that if there is an onerous paperwork process, everyone's on board and that we can process them more quickly. And we did lots of Spanish and English webinars that were sent out, but we also recognize that we probably have to do those on Facebook more because it seems like Facebook is the way to go for some of these outreach programs on top of radio, et cetera, and the paper. So as I move from our CARES Act, that's some of the data I have. I'm going to move into some of the opportunities ahead. There's a number of bills coming through the legislature. This one is House Bill 11 that sets aside an additional $200 million for LEDA-related businesses. And these are all the rules. It's a lot of small print there, but it's based upon jobs and business expansion. And the money, normally LEDA can be over a 10-year period, but this can come in a shorter period of time over 4 quarterly payments where we usually do a lease abatement over a period of time. This one I think has been signed by the governor. The next one is the Senate Bill 3, which is small business recovery. It is a loan program and it's a pretty good loan program. What we're finding is our small businesses are not very interested in taking out loans. And so we're trying to encourage them to look at the long game of bringing their business back up to the normal spot that they were. And a loan would be an easier way to do that because the grant is such a short-term fixed for usually past expenses, whereas a loan can actually look at your future revenue and operations going forward. Some other programs that the New Mexico State Economic Development Group is working with the federal government is the PPP program. Right now, there's a special period for really tiny businesses through the end of this month. And that I thought was a really cool idea to get businesses to try the PPP. If you're under $2 million, this is the time to apply for PPP because the larger enterprises, corporations have been shut out until March 31st. So we're hoping that a lion's share of the small businesses will get some of this PPP money. And the EIDL program is a relief program. Some of our larger local businesses have applied for this. Again, it's a loan. And so some of the larger business tech companies, creative companies here have applied for that. And then the third one is just the deferment of an SBA loan. And that's again a loan, but it's a great way to, if you're talking about the long game for a business as it grows, this is a great way to sort of defer the cost of paying on the principal and interest so that you can sort of bring your business, put it into a growth mode. These next slides really talk about the upcoming ARP, as it's called, this America Relief Plan, is the new Biden administration stimulus package that comes out of that $1.9 trillion. There's about, I think it's almost 15 billion that's used and set aside for different types of small business programs. So the top one is this Community Navigator grant for $100 million. And these are all nationwide numbers. I haven't really been able to get what the specific city number is. Then we know that a city is going to get about $15 million in grant funding, but we don't know if it's going to separate between city general fund or it's going to have a separate tranche for small businesses. So I want to just give you an overview of some of this relief programs. This Community Navigators grant, for us, is a great thing for us to really get out there and work on what we call the jumpstart aspect of businesses. We want to figure out how to get some of these businesses jump-started, understand what they need, collect some data, and then work with our business community partners from that standpoint. That's where the outreach and education piece comes in. And then there's $10 billion set aside for Small Business Credit Initiative. This is part of an earlier Jobs Act piece, and it's now also going to be tied into a restaurant relief fund. As you all know, we have tourism as one of our largest industry sectors, and so any restaurant relief funds we can get is a great way for us. And again, it's another way that we have to figure out how to make sure that these restaurants will look at loans in a favorable light. Another one that's really unique is 1.525 set aside for shuttered venue operators. Think of the Lensic Theater or small little theaters that we have in the city. So there'll be some money set aside for them. I don't know if this applies to movie theaters, but I know it applies to performing arts. And so we are looking to figure out how to make sure that our local operations apply for those grants. The ones that the next two are really kind of exciting because they talk about employee retention. As you know, there are a lot of businesses that could not afford to hold the wages for folks if they're essential employees and had to leave. They didn't have any insurance, or they didn't have any unemployment, they couldn't survive after the unemployment insurance ran out, or the employer could not pay more. So this is a great way for employers, especially small businesses that don't carry large unemployment insurance or other benefits to their employees. This is a great way to support those efforts. So this is another thing that will be coming through. What's exciting about this ARP program, most of it, is that it's coming in two waves. And from what we know, it's going to extend until 2023. So there'll be a lot of time to get businesses on board and look through the grant first phase, maybe loan second phase, as we make our way through this pandemic and the economic downturn. So with that, I'm going to turn it off and answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Councilor Villarreal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good to see you, Rich. You're probably on spring break and presenting.
Yeah.
Your time, even though you should be lying on a beach somewhere for us. There was a lot of information. If you could just send us the slides.
Sure.
I might have missed this because I took a bio break. Did you say the CARES Act funding for small businesses and nonprofits, was that to keep payroll going? Or was that just any expense they had as a related to COVID? Or I might have missed that, so I'm sorry.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, the CARES Act funding was actually what they call business continuity. So it was used for rent, electric bills, telephone bills, those sorts of things that help you continue your business, keep your lights on.
But not staff.
Not staff. That was what the PPP was used for.
Got it. And then did they have any requirements for number of employees for that particular business in order for them to be qualified to apply?
No, the qualification was based upon revenue, 2019 taxable revenue. So it originally was 2 million and it was raised to 5 million. And most of our businesses are under 2 million, but we did have a couple businesses that are vital to the community that are in the 2 to 5 million range.
Got it. And how many, I missed that slide, how many were actually funded through that funding source?
171 were funded, 223 had applied, but by the time they applied, either the money had run out or the time had run out. So we have all their data, and so we're trying to get prepared to queue them up if we get more specific funding from the ARP program.
Got it. All right. And then the other stuff, I'll just have to look at again because it was a lot of dense information about what's on the pike. So if I have any questions, I'll ask you later. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Thanks.
Councilor Rivera.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Rich, for taking time out of your spring break to present to us. We won't try to keep you too long. You said 171 got funded, and you gave presentations both in Spanish and in English. Do you have a breakdown of what percentage of the 171 funded were potentially English as a second language businesses? If you don't have that, if you can get it to me at some point.
Yeah, I don't. It might be difficult. I'll ask my county counterparts, but I think it would be a little difficult. It wasn't a stat that they gathered. But I can ask my county counterparts.
If you can do that, that information would be helpful. And again, thanks for taking the time. And I'm glad we were able to make an impact on at least 171 that were funded. And I'm glad you have the 223 ready to go for any additional funding. So appreciate that as well.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Counselor Cassett Sanchez.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you so much, Rich, for being here. A quick question. Of 223 total applied, and of those 171 received funding, or 223 additional applied, and we have them in the queue?
Yeah, so Madam Chair, Council Cassett Sanchez, there are two numbers. 171 was the number of people who, businesses that applied that received funding. And then 223 also applied, but did not get a grant fund.
Okay, perfect, wonderful. I at first understood it one way and then another way, so thank you for clarifying that. You might not have time for this presentation today, and it might be a larger discussion, but something that I am curious about learning more about in the future. Obviously, dollars is one of the number one ingredients that we need for economic recovery, but I'm curious what we as a city are doing to help support businesses recover that maybe is not financial, whether that be, I know that there's different small business associations that we can connect people to if we're thinking about any types of campaigns that we might be able to promote our businesses. I'm just curious, what are the other pieces of this economic recovery that we need to be looking at, besides just money going in, which of course is the key and necessary ingredient that we have to have. But I'm wondering if there's anything else that we need to be baking the economic recovery cake, if you will.
So Councilor Cassett Sanchez, I can talk a little bit about that. So there's a number of different paths that we're taking right now on the recovery side, and we really want to get to the resiliency side. But a couple things that we're doing are, we have sponsored a number of local business advisory groups that are doing information resource webinars over the last 3 months and over the next 9 months, because information is power to a business that's trying to grow. So they need to know about taxation, they need to know about e-commerce, they need to know about what is finance, be financially literate, those sort of things. There are a lot of small businesses that did not have a fundamental basis as they were growing their business, because it grew organically. So we're doing a lot of webinars around just free, come hear the story about, what about taxes, and what about how do you build your books, and what's a balance sheet, and what about branding, and what about e-commerce, and how do you pivot to a new channel. So we're doing a lot of that, and we're also I use some of our funding to sponsor some entrepreneurial accelerators. So we have a food one going on right now. We had a social benefit company accelerator that just finished their cohort. We're in the middle of bringing to the council the business incubator contract for 4 years. And we're also our funder of the New Mexico Angels for venture funding for small businesses to grow. I'm going to cross my fingers right now, but if we get our federal dollars, one of the crazy ideas that I have in the pipeline right now is that I want to open up an entrepreneur center on Airport Road for immigrant businesses. They can have, just like a FedEx office, right? You can come in, bilingual, get all your business services. Once a week, there's a business partner of ours who does business advisory that comes in and sits with you and answers your questions. We want to bring sort of that closer to the neighborhood. We have them all over the place in Midtown, we have them downtown, but we don't really have them near or by the Airport Road area. So I'm hoping to get some federal grant money for that. And the next piece I'm working on, again, this is if I hope to get the federal funding, is that we want to work on a giant job training and workforce program where we can place an intern in a business that could help with the e-commerce, the social aspect of businesses that are always never had a website or never had a social presence, that are now sort of struggling to figure out how to find their audience beyond just the people who live within a 2-mile radius of the business. So those are some of the things that we're working on right now that we're trying to get in front of, so that either it comes through the FY22 budget or we get it through the federal grant once that money's been put into the coffers for the city.
Wonderful. Thank you. That was great to hear. And I'm excited that, to be learning more about these as they come to development. Thank you so much for thinking about these. And then one last question. I know that prior to the pandemic, we frequently have these conversations about how do we diversify our economy. And you just listed a number of ways that we are looking at potentially doing that. But we had spent a lot of time talking about the tech industry and bringing the tech industry to Santa Fe and some of the different tech startups that had been attracted here. And I'm curious if the pandemic has shifted that, because I know that a lot of companies, and I would imagine a lot of tech companies especially, are looking at almost this 100% virtual, not having a headquarter. And so I'm curious how that has impacted our views on that as one of the many viable industries that we were looking at in the city, and what that might mean for us.
That's a very good question. And there's a couple things going on concurrently. One is that we have 2 new tech companies here, both startups. One is actually out there finding venture funding. They're located downtown. And then in 2 weeks, I'm also talking to another tech company that's looking to move here. And then the third one is that we have a tech entrepreneur who moved here, sold his company, moved here, and is looking to build an innovation village in the south of town by the Presbyterian Hospital. And he wants to put together sort of a recruitment strategy to bring tech companies, but he wants to mix it with a housing and walkable city idea. And the other sort of interesting trend is that a lot of the tech companies are moving into a remote work mode. So they're not really looking for a commercial space yet, but they're looking for satellite offices, because the remote workers are now across the country, and some are looking at, I might want to come to, the winters are great because you can go skiing in Taos and go skiing in Santa Fe, or just enjoys the atmosphere here. So some of these tech companies are looking to branch out and sort of build small satellites to take advantage of the talent that might be here. So that's something that we're also looking at. But right now I'm just nurturing these smaller tech companies that are interested in coming here. I'm trying to steer them first to the downtown area to get some vibrancy downtown, but they are calling. And so once the remote companies are sort of looking at what to do and see Santa Fe put the signal up for us, we're hoping that they come here. The other big thing is that you may have heard that Lannel has now expanded into an office space at Pacheco and St. Mike's. And with that, 500 business people coming to our downtown area, it's going to attract a slew of ancillary tech companies because of the work that they do. So we see a triple benefit from it. One, that they're going to be able to take advantage and sort of spur the growth of the businesses surrounding that building, because it won't be 500 people at once, but there'll be nearly 250 on a daily basis, with their spend in a 3-4 mile radius of that area. So that's going to sort of rock the growth of that area. And then 2, that some who don't live here will probably get sick of the commute and say, wow, this is a great place to live, and move here. And then 3, they will attract other businesses, plus they will do likely, hopefully, some tech transfer. Instead of going to Albuquerque or going to Silicon Valley, they can actually just branch out their tech transfer here in Santa Fe, because it's right in the backyard where they have other resources.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And just as a side comment, and things that we always think about as we look at the balance of growing companies here and what that means for housing, and all these are now under use, so this is helpful. And just as we're thinking about that, also thinking about what that means for housing for our community that is already here, as well as it just always makes me think about what are the the pipelines to make sure that these jobs are available for Santa Feans, and how else are we bringing in educational opportunities and working with the educational institutions in the region so that some of these new jobs will then be available for our local community, and that they have the job training, and how we're looking at those pieces as well. So those thoughts just popped into my head as you were speaking, so I wanted to make sure that I expressed them, as I know that was one of the pieces that was as we were talking about the reorg, that this was one of the potential opportunities that we had here, is how we can look at all of these different components that go together and make sure that we are addressing them together, so that growth in one sector doesn't negatively impact the outcomes that we're looking for in the other. So I really appreciate you taking the time to talk about those things with me.
Thank you. Any other thoughts from the committee? Just real quick. So some of these loan programs, are they revolving loans? Like, what happens when the money gets paid back? Are we just going to keep lending it out? I mean, is this a long-term commitment in these areas, or I don't know? It's sort of interesting, the whole loan idea. What happens, or once they're paid back? I mean, I can't imagine we're sending the money back and being like, okay, that was good.
Yeah.
Curious.
Yeah, some of the federal loan programs are pretty much what I'd call a forgivable loan program. It's almost like our LEADER program, is that as long as you are paying, you can take they'll stretch out your terms, etc. The state ones are I forgot, I think that the House one is kind of a revolving loan program where once the money's paid back, they can extend the program because they'll know how big their pot is. But more than anything else, they want to encourage just putting the money into play, putting it into the community, and that the terms of the life of the loan is almost a secondary piece, because that's just a way for them to say, because so many businesses are so reticent about taking loans out that they want to make sure that it's as easy a term as possible before they have to pay back. So I think the House one is probably, I think it's a revolving one, but the other ones are really focused on, it should be, you get the loan and you don't start paying back for 3 to 5 years. And those 3 to 5 years, you may be able to just pay it back. You just might be able to balloon it back to them, but so they are that the money is just being flowed through the system, and that the terms are pretty easy for them at the end.
And some may be you meet certain criteria, and then that's just then considered an investment in.
Yes, some are, yes. So some, like there's one, I think it's I forget which one it is, but the LEADA one is the same way. It's based upon job growth, and that's another reason why they want the loans out there, is based upon job growth. That job growth turns into a consideration for the money that's being loaned out. Is that if you reach your job numbers, then your loan amount could be forgiven over this course of time.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, thank you. Thank you for being with us tonight. Enjoy your break. And if you're even getting one, maybe just a change of scenery. Do we have any other questions for Director Brown while we have him? Okay, thanks. Really appreciate it.
Sure,
so matters from staff. Jennifer, do you have anything?
No, I don't, Madam Chair.
Great. Matters from the committee? Seeing none. Matters from the chair. Our next meeting is Wednesday. Can you believe it? It's going to be April 7th, 2021. The year is moving ahead. Thanks, everybody. Great conversations tonight. We'll see you next time. We are adjourned.